quick hand to our special guests, Alex, Chad, Christopher, and Dennis.
Well, first of all, good morning. I'd like to actually start out this little presentation by saying I spent the majority of last night trying to carry a conversation over very loud music. So my voice is kind of shot this morning. So not the wisest idea in the world. You think I would have learned that by now over the course of doing these, but apparently not. So bear with me as I try to repair my damaged voice box. For those of you who don't know, we, some of the people of Animatic Creative, we are a full-service animation, visual effects, motion graphics studio with a little bit of interactive thrown in downtown near Deep Ellum Fair Park. One of the things that they, I guess before we go too far, I'd like to introduce my job in the company. You know, we're a fairly small company. We have about 20-something people, and you know, we all wear a lot of different hats. My job is kind of day-to-day functioning as president of the company, you know, and kind of managing projects and creative direction and so forth. Christopher over here is our resident ZBrush surfacing, modeling, texturing guru, and Dennis is our go-to guy for lighting and compositing and all things related to that. They also are actually, they both share a very similar skill set in the sense that Christopher is also very, very good at lighting and compositing, and Dennis is also very, very good at modeling and texturing. As we get into the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about the specific stuff that we're going to go over. But first, I just want to kind of talk about kind of the genesis of the project, how it came to be, and then we'll start off with that, go into more specific details, and then we can talk a little bit about Q&A, and y'all can ask questions. So the specific project that we're going to be talking about today is the AICP Southwest sponsor reel that we did last year in 2011. For those of you who don't know about the AICP, I'll tell you a little bit about that. I actually wrote down what the acronym means because every other time I've gotten up to give a talk about what AICP stands for, inevitably I call it the American Igloo Cooling Professionals or something of that nature. So rather than embarrass myself one more time, I actually wrote it down. AICP stands for the Association of Independent Commercial Producers. And specifically, we did this for the Southwest region. It's a national organization. They break it up into different sections around the country. And it is basically, it is an organization that caters to everything and anything in relationship to commercial TV spot production. Now, nowadays in the digital world, that's kind of a loose term because it doesn't necessarily just mean broadcast on TV anymore. But nevertheless, that's kind of the market they cater to, much like Short Guys caters to everything in the realm of animation, visual effects, and editing and post-production. They have basically every year they have a giant party and an event where they showcase all of the commercial work that's been done, all the commercial work that's been done in the previous year. And this involves everything from production, like with cameras and grips and dollies and so forth, all the way down to editing, sound design, music, visual effects, everything that encompasses what it means to make a commercial. And these events are basically, again, kind of broken up by the region, Southwest, Northwest, et cetera. And obviously, during the party, for any of you who've been to Industry Giants or any other large event, you all know that these parties aren't possible without people pumping a lot of money to, buy food and beverages and, rent the venue and et cetera. And so, they normally have like a little, sponsor reel where they showcase all of the different categories, platinum, gold, silver, bronze, and, as a thank you to the people who donated money to the event. Every year, the AICP goes forth and they select a different audio music company and a different company to actually produce the visual element. And we were actually very honored last year to be asked to step up and deliver the video portion. When they came to us, it was actually a lot shorter of a time frame than they normally give when they select someone due to a variety of reasons beyond everyone's control. So we really had roughly about 5 to 6 weeks all into concept, design, animate, light, render, the whole 9 yards, music before the show. And these pieces are normally about 5 minutes, roughly, give or take. And for those of you who, I don't know if any of you have actually seen some of the ones that were done before, but people have done all manner of things. I mean, some of it's been pure live action. You know, they'll actually go out and shoot like a mini short film to show off the logos. Some of them have been like completely 2D animated. I mean, if you go Google AICP sponsor your videos, you'll actually see quite an impressive collection of animation and everything under the sun, where they basically, you know, come up with a clever way to show off the sponsor logos. So one of the things, so anyway, they came up to us and kind of asked us to do it this year. We were really excited. And again, they don't really give you any other direction. It's basically carte blanche to do whatever you want. As long as you show the, you know, 40-something logos in a decent amount of time, you can do anything that you put your mind to, if, you know, as long as it shows the logos, essentially. So with that said, basically what I want to do is I want to show what we produced last year. And after we show that, then I'll talk a little bit more in detail about kind of what all went into that. So let me pull up the video here real quick. Okay, so that makes up pretty much that's the video, the final product. Like I said, the good when we put it out there, we were actually really amazed. I mean, we knew we had something special, but that was one of those videos where it's kind of fun when you get it out there and then you see everyone's reaction to it. I don't think any of us had any idea how much people were going to take to it and how much people were going to love it. We've gotten comments from literally all over the world of people emailing in after we put it online and put it out there, of people saying, "Oh, I love the video, it's great, it's awesome." The end client, the people at AICP, they loved it. Got a lot of good praise from them. It was featured on Cartoon Brew. Motionographer did an article on it. A couple of the Canon 5D blogs, which is one of the cameras that we use, they featured stuff. Again, the international emails. And I think probably the biggest thing for me, from a personal standpoint, since my big thing is story. I wanted to tell a story, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. But I got emailed as we sent this out. People would send me emails where they have forwarded the video in their company or onto their friends or whatever, and it was amazing the discussions that were taking place. It wasn't, people weren't commenting on like, "Oh great, I love this, the little miniature stuff, I love that." It was all stuff like, "Oh man, I cried when I saw the little girl and boy, and oh man, that's so sad. I felt so bad for that little kid." And the people got into a whole philosophical debate on time travel. There was one whole email thread for literally that went on for 20 emails of well, if time stopped for him, that means he's not going to get any older, but she's wearing the watch, so she's going to stay the same age. And there was a whole big debate about this. And so it was really astounding to me how this thing kind of took a life of its own once it got out there. And that was a pretty remarkable thing for me, and probably the best thing I took away from it was just how much people embedded it into their own lives and kind of took their own interpretation on what the video meant. So that was really a really big special thing for me. So the project that you just witnessed basically involved about 26 people, 90 shots, 377 gigabytes worth of files, 2 melted building models, and all produced once we finally figured out the concept and the story, was produced from start to finish in about 4 weeks. And that was all basically in our spare time, working around other gigs. It wasn't just like the entire studio was dedicated for this project for those 4 weeks. So it was a pretty impressive feat on our end, considering how we had to fire on all cylinders and get every single member of the company involved in it. So kind of backing up a little bit, how did all this happen? Well, as far as the process for the story goes and how we kind of decided, okay, what are we going to do? Obviously the daunting thing about being given carte blanche to do anything you want is you can do anything you want. So one of the things that we like to do whenever there's a project of a bigger scope is kind of literally get everyone in the company involved in the idea and the storytelling process. So we gathered everybody in the conference room and we kind of laid out the parameters. We're going to have 40-something logos. We need to keep it around 5 minutes, hopefully. And most importantly, we need to create something that we can actually produce in a short amount of time. So everybody kind of brainstormed and came up with a wide variety of ideas. We had all these ideas about like mechanical hummingbirds and the kind of larger-than-life things rolling through downtown Dallas. And there were all a lot of really cool visual ideas, but none of them, after we got done with the meeting, we realized that none of them really told the story that we wanted to tell, and B, they were all visual gimmicks, but there was the potential for a lot of complexity and production aspects that we just didn't have time to do in the time we had. So we actually, there's a ton of story ideas, which we were trying to keep the complexity in check, and so we kind of broke apart. We took those ideas, and then we came back, and I basically had a smaller group get together, and I said, okay, here are some of the top ideas we took out of that meeting. Let's refine this and kind of hone it down. So they sat around for a day. We kicked some stuff around. Still wasn't 100% sure with anything that we came up with, just because, again, of the complexity, and there was no really central thematic story that I really felt was super strong. And then ironically, after all this time, after we all brainstormed, kind of came together, the genesis for this particular video actually came, we saw a picture. It was basically me and two other people sitting around, some of the principals involved in the photography, Brad Herbert, and then Rick Perez, who was involved in the producing aspect of it. We were sitting around looking at all the ideas that we'd come up with, and as we were kind of brainstorming ideas, one of the things that we saw was there was a single still picture of a World War II miniature set, that had, I tried to find it, I wish I could have brought it here, but it was just a real simple little miniature. It had a little tree, and we looked at that and we were like, you know, that's something we haven't seen done before. Nobody tried to combine miniature photography. For this particular venue, nobody tried to combine miniature photography with CG, CG animated elements. And so using that as our kind of our eureka moment, we decided, all right, well, obviously we don't have time to build our own miniature set, so where in the world can we find someone who already has some kind of set that we can just look at and try to frame our story around that set? So we did a little bit of research, and let me show some of these. Let's see here. Okay. So basically what we found is we started emailing around, talking to people, saying, hey, do you know anybody who has a miniature set? You know, we're trying to do a video, let us know if you know of anything. And we found a couple of smaller sets that really weren't as elaborate as we needed them to be. And so we looked around, and let's see here. Basically, we found we found a set that was over in Fort Worth, and basically it was a Lockheed Martin recreational facility, and the Lockheed Martin recreational facility it was partly sponsored by Lockheed Martin. It's kind of just a place for the employees to kind of do hobbies and activities and so forth, but apparently about 15 or 20 of the guys over at Lockheed Martin who are really big, like miniature train enthusiasts, have basically spent the last 15 to 20 years actually building this huge train set / miniature city with basically completely fully functional lights, moving trains, and some other little animated features in there that's absolutely staggering. I mean, this particular facility you can kind of see here from the pictures. Let me go through here. See if I can get this maximized. There we go. You can kind of see here, I mean, this thing is huge. It literally, that's probably the best view of the room right there, and it literally spans, something probably bigger, almost twice the size of this room right here, and maybe a little bit bigger. You can't even see all the way around it. But everything there's a good chunk of the stuff on here, the trains, the lights, everything, it's all fully functional. And so we saw this, and we were just like, this is perfect, I mean, it's huge, there's a ton of locations, we can take this and kind of frame our story around this facility. So basically we worked out a deal with the guys, and they're like, sure, we'll be happy to have you, come over. We told them we would reimburse them for using the place, and they were more than happy to come, let us kind of come in and shoot, whatever we wanted. So I'll just kind of go through some of the pictures here. I talk a little bit more in depth about kind of the production aspect of this. This is really more Brad's forte. Brad's the guy right there in front of the picture with the camera. As we started to look at this and try to figure out, okay, how are we going to shoot this? How are we going to make this happen? The one thing you can kind of see, let's see here, is if you look back at this one, there's really not a lot of room in between the aisles. So one of the things we had to be really conscious about when we went out and shot was, whatever we do, we've got to have a minimal amount of gear with, with as small of a footprint as we can possibly have to squeeze in here and shoot the shots that we needed to do. But for those of you who are photography fans and like to do a lot with video, you're all aware that, DSLR cameras are pretty popular nowadays. Especially the one that kind of broke open the mold for a lot of, kind of bridging the gap between, the high-end commercial cameras and then the low-end prosumer cameras is the Canon 5D, 7D, 6D series of cameras. For this particular project, we have a 5D at the office, so we actually ended up shooting, I believe, with the 6D and the 7D for basically two reasons. The first reason is basically the 70 and 60 shoot 60 frames, can shoot up to 60 frames a second, when the 5D cannot. The reason that was important for us when we decided to go in and shoot this stuff was because as you're doing miniature stuff, as we were doing testing in the office, excuse me, we found out that if you cranked up the speed to 60 frames a second and shot it, then that kind of, normally when you're shooting like a regular, like a 24 or 29-97, the bumps in the camera are a lot more noticeable, like if you've got it on a dolly or you're trying to push in or do anything with the camera. But when you're shooting at 60p, those bumps become a lot less noticeable because it's in slow motion. And so we found that just kind of add like a little bit of a softer aesthetic to the video as we were shooting it. And so we ended up shooting with that, and then one of the other reasons was that we actually had access to more cameras of the same kind as opposed to the 5D at the current time. So, I mean, obviously, again, the big draw for that is these things have a very small form factor. You can get them in very tight places. You can use professional camera lenses on them to get a really nice look and a shallow depth of field. So, like I said, the first thing is so we decided, okay, here's what we're going to use. We've got this giant set. How do we possibly go through this whole thing and distill down exactly what story do we want to tell? So one of the things that we did just to kind of help the brainstorming process, once we knew that, once we kind of got the visual look and we knew that we wanted to tell a story with these tiny little people living in this tiny little world, is to basically just go out and shoot as many photos as we humanely could of every single area of this set, and basically cut together sort of a rough edit of the location. And I think I have a video, I believe, right here that kind of shows that initial rough edit. Let me see here. Actually, this is not it, but I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. So the first thing we did was we went out and shot photography of all the locations, and then we sat down and said, okay, of these locations, which one of them looked like the most beneficial from a storytelling standpoint? And then once we got that, we all came back in the room together and said, okay, here's the location, here's what we're doing. Everybody kind of started to come up with ideas based around these different locations. And one of the big key kind of recurring themes is, I think, as we saw this miniature train set, was, at least for us, it seemed like when you look at a miniature train set and something like this, and especially something as expansive as it is, there's an overwhelming sense of nostalgia, in the sense that, you think about when you were a kid, and you had a train set, and you had these little miniature people, and you were kind of, creating your own little world and everything. And so we realized that we kind of wanted to play that up and have our hero character be a kid. And then the next step was, and then the other predominant factor, if backing up a little bit and kind of going into the future here, is one of the other predominant factors why we did this was, quite honestly, is that we're lazy. Because we realized that if we were doing an entire video with miniature people and they were frozen, we wouldn't have to do a whole lot of animation. We could just fly the camera through and put a couple of animations here and there, and we're good to go. So, I mean, I joke kiddingly, there's certainly an element of that, but again, it kind of comes down to time frame. We've got 4 weeks. We want to do as much character animation as we can, but, how do we, make that character animation the bang for the buck, realizing that we can't animate an entire city, in the time we've got. So, we came up with the idea of, okay, we're going to have these moments. You look at this thing and you think of nostalgia, you think of moments that are frozen in time, and then you start to think of your own memories, and there's a really overwhelming emotional response there. So we decided to play that up and, why is time frozen? What is this kid doing in the world? Why is he wandering around? Why is he not frozen? So we sat around, brainstormed a bunch of ideas for that. you know, we had ideas as far as making the kid a superhero where he gets superpowers and kind of flies around and goes around doing good deeds. We also had some pretty, I guess, rather kind of morbid ideas where the kid just became a joke and like going around blowing stuff up and, you know, causing, you know, chaos throughout the city. And then so we kind of came back and kind of settled on the idea that you know, we did want the kid to kind of be good, but, you know, and then kind of, again, playing up to the whole nostalgia thing is like, what if he found some kind of a magic, like a magic watch in a box of Cracker Jacks or something like that, you know? Because you always think back when you're a kid and you go to the grocery store and you put the quarter in and it pops out a prize, or, you know, you open up a box of Cracker Jacks and it's got a decoder in or whatever. We wanted to play up that aspect of it. So with that in mind, you know, we kind of have this thing where the kid would freeze time. And at first, he's just kind of like, you know, stunned, you know, oh my gosh, I've frozen time. And he's just kind of wandering around, kind of getting his bearings. And then, like any kid would, at some point, he's like, I've got the whole world to myself. I'm going to go crazy. So then you kind of remember in the video, there's that certain point where the mood changes and boom, he goes off, he's going to the candy store, tipping over cows, pushing the ball in the china shop, you know, all that kind of fun stuff that you think a kid would do. You know, you know, and at the same time, we wanted to be able to make sure that we had a few moments in there that showed that the kid wasn't like, the kid just wasn't completely self-serving, like when he pulls the pants down on the robber, that he did have a good heart, and when he put the balloon, you know, he took the balloon and put the balloon back in the kid's hand, that he was a good kid, but he was just having fun and doing what any kid would do, which is kind of have a lot of fun with his newfound abilities. And one of the things we put in there, I don't know if any of you saw, was, you know, kind of coming back to the whole time, you know, the idea of freezing time and, you know, kind of getting a chance to catch your breath and slow things down, which, you know, and quite frankly, in this industry, you know, we all wish we had more time to do that, and just to kind of say, whoa, freeze time for a minute, let me catch my breath, is we put a lot of references to Back to the Future in here. There was a part in there where we hit you can see a DeLorean, you know, in the background in one of the cars. In one of the scenes, we put on the side of a truck, we put dark brown flux capacitors. So there's a lot of references to Back to the Future that we kind of hid in the video, you know, just a kind of our own inside joke that we thought was kind of fun. So let's see here. So the other funny thing about the shoot is, you know, like anything, you know, you say, okay, this is going to take me, you know, we'll get this done in 8 hours. We'll get this done in 9 hours. Well, you know, unfortunately for poor Brad and Luis and Jeff, the other two guys that are out there helping him, you know, what originally was planned for 8 or 10 hours turned into an all-night marathon of shooting, because obviously nothing ever goes as fast as you want it to. And Brad ended up staying overnight in the building. And, you know, he was trying to find a place to sleep. And one of the places they had to sleep was in the middle of this whole thing. I don't know if they have a picture of it here. Let me see real quick. Let's see here. I don't know. I think it is. I don't know if they have a very good picture of it. I think it's on the other side, but they actually have like a little control booth in the middle of this thing that kind of comes up. And this is where like the control panel is to make all the trains go and turn all the lights off and on and so forth. Well, Brad ended up putting 2 chairs together in the middle of this thing and sleeping on that in the middle of the night during the shoot. And in the middle of the night, basically, he was woken up. He felt something on his face, and he kind of, you know, scratched his face. He felt it again, and then he realized there was a cockroach crawling over his face. So Brad freaks out, knocks off the cockroach, understandably, he's trying to find another place to sleep. He gives up and ends up spending the night out in his, he slept in the back of his truck before the next day when he came back in. So he fought off his little mini cockroach infestation in the middle of the night. The other funny thing about the production, which I thought, you know, trying to find a picture of it, I couldn't find it in time, but, you know, as you're shooting, and especially as you've got like a shallow depth of field, and depending on what you're doing with the camera, you need a lot of light in these scenes to basically make it look good. And at one point, you know, we had, you know, you can kind of see here a little bit of how close they got it. You can kind of see here, we had lights really close up on these miniatures, especially for the daylight shot, which, you know, you need like a strong directional light. Well, as we weren't exactly paying the closest attention, a few of the lights got a little too close to some of the models and melted them. And so that would be all fine and dandy if we thought they were just run-of-the-mill models, but one of the stories that the guy who runs the place told us was like, yeah, you know, some of these guys have put like, you know, they spent 10 years working on one model. And so we're all like, oh boy, you know, we've just, you know, pissed 10 years of someone's life down the drain. So the good news is the models that we did melt were the run-of-the-mill, you know, crappy ones, so they weren't the custom hand-built ones. So that was a big relief on our end. So, you know, the joys of production. So that was kind of that. As far as, you know, the shooting and that aspect of it goes, you know, we got a little dolly in there so we could do some camera moves. You know, we tried to amp up the production value, you know, as much as we could, kind of going from night to day, as you saw in the video. And like I said, so we spent, we had an overall for production, we had one day we went out and shot photos just to kind of get the lay of the land and see what we wanted to do. There was another really long, like, day and a half where we shot the main principal photography, and then we did go back out for, I believe, like a half a day of pickup shoot to get the rest of the footage that we were missing as we put the edit together. So, so the first thing we did after we got all this footage the first time when we shot it is we put together this little paper animatic. Let me show this. I'll show this real quickly. So basically, at this point, we tried to cut together really rough, unstabilized footage, and then figure out where the logos are going to go. You know, we obviously have 40 logos. We've got to figure out how to spread it apart, you know, across the entire video. And then the other thing was essentially we went in and for any animation that we had of the main hero kid, we just went in and did pencil sketches to figure out, okay, you know, what he's going to do. I think you saw a few of those sketches here. I'm trying to find some of them. Like we did these little really rough pencil sketches, like, okay, you know, he's going to look up, he's going to see this. And that way, we were able to basically cut together the rough animatic and figure out, you know, how long is this thing, do we need more footage, you know, how much character animation are we going to need, et cetera, et cetera. And then based off that, what we did is from that point, we started, you know, creating models and assets, and we'll talk about that here in a minute when Christopher gets up here. And then we started making a wish list of the things that we thought were important and the things that we needed to have, as opposed to the things, you know, the extra pluses that we wanted to have. And then the next step beyond that was creating a actual 3D animatic, which I'll show here. Here. So you can see here, like, we started just kind of roughly blocking out everything in Softimage. So, and therefore, I was just kind of backing up pretty much 95% of all the work we do at the studio is done with Softimage XSI. You know, we use Max and Maya for conversion purposes to get assets in and out, but if we have our choice, we'll do it in Softimage. And then also we'll talk a little bit more about the rigging process and all that kind of stuff. We also started putting in shots. As we started to get test shots done, we put the test shots in there just to kind of see how everything looked as we slammed together the 3D animatic. I'll show some more of that here. Like again, kind of some of the rough 3D. Again, so obviously we're firing on all cylinders at this point, because at this point we've roughly got about like 2 weeks left to bust this thing out. So we're doing character animation, we're lighting, we're compositing, everything's all happening at the same time. And that's one of the things that we've taken a lot of great pains to do at the studio, is to make our process as non-linear as possible. You know, XSI is kind of built from light to do that from the ground up in a lot of capacities, but we've extended that to a significant amount with things like our auto rig system. We've got our own lighting and path manager where we can copy lights and render passes from shot to shot to kind of help speed that process up. So we've developed we've spent a significant amount of money on infrastructure to make stuff like this, you know, on a short term, as fast as possible, actually feasible. So the paper animatic, and then the 3D animatic, let's see here. You know, and then from that point, you know, obviously during this whole process, you know, Christopher was kind of refining the look of the characters. I mean, everything's happening all at once, and again, he'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then, you know, once we locked down everything, we finished off with all the animation. Towards the end of it, we started working with the audio music post-production facility at Tequila Mockingbird. Those guys did a great job on the music. They were really great to work with, so we were really happy about that. And then the last thing I want to talk about before I turn it over to the guys here was the animation style that we were using. You know, whenever we started doing the miniature model stuff, you know, you look at it and your first natural inclination is to say, oh, we're going to do stop motion. You know, we want it to look like stop motion. So we thought about that and we're like, you know, do we really want to do that? I mean, you know, you can animate on twos and kind of give it like a jittery look, but, you know, I don't know if that's really what, you know, I really don't know if, I mean, that's been done before, you know, I mean, people have tried to make stuff look like stop motion. So what we kind of settled on was, we didn't want to go full-blown like, super smooth character, Pixar into things, but we almost wanted it to feel like these characters, because they were made out of plastic, they were moving in a smooth fashion, but they still felt like they had a little bit they're fighting against their own plastic shells, you know, like, so that's why if you notice when you watch some of it, is like the characters, they're kind of struggling against each other, like they're struggling to be alive, you know, and because of their little plastic, you know, what they are, little plastic miniatures. And so we would kind of find a happy medium with that. Actually, one of the first ones we did is when the kid kind of runs down the street. And we spent a lot of time refining the animation on that to kind of get that look that we wanted. So somewhere in between stop motion and full-blown, you know, super smooth character animation. And so that look, we were really happy with kind of how that look turned out, and we kind of applied that to all the characters. And so that's really the kind of gist of it. Like I said, we wrapped it up. We wrapped it up, and like I said, we sent it off, and everybody really dug it. The one thing, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to have Christopher come up first, and Christopher is going to talk about a lot of the sculpting, ZBrush, the modeling process, kind of what we did for that, as well as the auto rigging, talk a little bit about how we rigged them up, how we were able to rig so many characters in such a short amount of time. And then also Dennis will come up and talk a little bit about the lighting and the compositing process, the HDRI, and kind of show a breakdown of one of the things. So with that, I will basically turn it over to Christopher and let him talk a little bit about that.
Okay, I guess I'll start off with basically one good thing about using the miniature sets and this whole concept allowed us to basically be kind of sloppy with our modeling without being too sloppy. The miniature sets are very detailed and complex models, but when you get down to it and look at the molds, they're kind of lumpy. The painting's not all within the lines, so it gave us a little bit of freedom to be a little bit stylized and not have to spend a whole lot of time being super detailed in our models. I'll start with the evolution of Jack. We started out with ZBrush with all of our characters. He started out as a tall, lanky boy, but to get him more as a child, he kind of got shorter and bulkier and wider. We changed up things like his loops on his pants and his overalls, and it was about a week of evolution to get him where we wanted him, and then we based Jill off of him to kind of, I think we actually used the exact same mesh and just attached pigtails to her. So he evolved to what he is there, and this is the wireframe that we have of him. We have a base mesh that we start all of our pedal models with, and we kind of refined it for this guy to keep him very simple. Eliminated the eyes, the mouth cavities, ears, anything that was too complex that you wouldn't see in a basic model. And they grabbed a bunch of the small miniatures for us and brought them back to the office, and we spent a day or two replicating those models so we can kind of get a feel for how to sculpt this and make sure we're replicating accurately. This turned out to be a little bit sloppy. Basically, the only thing I was worried about was making sure we had edge loops in the shoulders and elbows and knees. And like Chad touched on, they were going to be kind of not very fluid, so we didn't have to worry about them doing too much as far as crazy animation, extending them too far. And with the time constraint, we wanted to keep things reasonable so we could actually pull off a good look without spending too much time on topology. XSI and auto rig allowed for a lot of freedom with the geometry, with the topology and the weighting. I like XSI's weighting system. It's very nonlinear. It's very artistic. It allows for a lot of freedom of getting weights where you want them, and you're not limited to a tubular or a cylinder fall-off system that a lot of, I think, like Max is required to use a cell fall-off weighting system. So you can literally paint, weights for the hands in the shoulder. If it, there's sometimes where I've painted some ridiculous weights just to get the motion I need out of the character. So we basically started with Jack, got him pinned down. Let me bring up my notes here before I get too far off base. As I said, we started out with ZBrush. This was before R2, so we did not have Dynamesh. That would have worked out. That would have helped a ton, just because the style of the character, if I go back to the ZBrush, and like the molds are, they're very bulky, they're very lumpy. Dynamesh would have been great for that. We wouldn't have had to worry about topology at all while we were sculpting. Since we didn't have Dynamesh, we had to sculpt and then kind of smooth down, and sometimes I'd bring back in the original mesh and reproject the details onto that so I can have a clean topology again and then continue sculpting and repeating that process several times. So Dynamesh would have been great for that. Now that we have Dynamesh, we start out all of our characters with Dynamesh and then retopologize over the top. We cleaned up the mesh for proper loops and joints once we had the final sculpt completed. Got loops to the best of our ability where we needed them for proper deformation. And again, these guys were kind of they're not going to be completely fluid, so the loops were not super critical. So we got away with a lot in that aspect. Yeah, we went back and forth. Chad touched on this. We went back and forth on the characters, whether they should be stiff, whether they should be plastic, or if they're going to need a whole lot of fluid movements. We didn't have eyes or mouths on these characters, so all their emotion needed to be conveyed through the animation itself. So we kind of found that medium in between stiff and fluid to allow for emotion to come across without eyes or mouth, because I mean a lot of that comes from facial expressions and etc. Once we had the model completed, we went on to the UVing. We started out using PUV tiles in ZBrush. We were just going to use ZBrush's UVs because most of you probably know that's just a one-click solution, literally one click and you're done with the UVs. And that worked out. So that worked out to a point until we got to the displacement mapping and found a couple of problems with just having too many UV shells, and padding between the UV shells started to cause issues with displacement. So we ended up laying out our UVs by hand. And to do that, we use Hdr's UV layout. I'll bring up a movie of that and just show the process. A little time lapse here. I did real quick. Oops. Try that again. There we go. I actually did this yesterday. I went back and re-UV'd him real quick just to show the process that we use. I love this program. I've been using it for about maybe 5 years now. We use it for organic and hard surface models. basically you find your seams and split them. And once you have that completed, you drop your shells into a UV space for flattening. It's great being able to work in 3D. Have the option of having 3D and 2D when laying out the UVs. And it does such an amazing job at getting proper layout. So if you're going to be painting in 2D, you don't have to worry about stretching so much. And then this is the algorithm that UV layout uses. It's literally, again, kind of a one-click solution. You drop them to the UV space, you hit F for flatten, and it runs through this algorithm and flattens them out. And towards the end, I will show the final layout. So this is really great. And symmetry, you get one shell done, symmetrize it over to the other. Let me fast forward a little bit. So basically completed that process for each shell. And it'll pack them all up for you. And this is the layout. So you get a very, very solid layout. So if you are going to be painting in 2D, you're either going to be painting in 2D or you're going to take this into ZBrush and paint in 3D, and ZBrush will accommodate for the lack of flat UVs and project the textures correctly. But UV layout gives us great, great results on all of our organic and inorganic objects. So we use that for all of our UVs. Literally, I think that took me 5 minutes. That was a 5-minute video at twice the speed there. So we spent about 5 minutes per character laying out all the UVs. We could have used, since they all had the same topology, we could have just laid them out once, used Hdr to transfer the UVs in XSI, or we could have done a morph system, taking Jack, using his UVs, and then morphing him into another character, and then repainting those textures for that character. But since there was such a difference in size and proportions on characters, we went ahead and did each character, and UV layout accommodated for the fact that we need to get it done very fast. So it wasn't an issue to UV every single character. So all the characters we had to UV are here. And there's actually two I forgot in there, the thief stealing the woman's purse and the woman who had the purse. I didn't include them. But we had, what do we got, 3, 9, 6, 9, 10, 12 characters. Well, 10 humans. We actually had a rig, texture, UV, and 5 minutes of pop. It was really nothing to get that done. We used ZBrush's poly painting. Like in the beginning, like I said, these models allow for a lot of freedom to not always have to paint within the lines. I actually went out of my way to make sure I was sloppy here. Areas where an airbrush would not be able to paint in physically, whether by man or machine, just try to keep a little bit of, keep going back to sloppy. I don't want to use sloppy. Stylized. I'm going to use stylized. Throw that one around anytime. So it was really nice just to be, the poly painting, again, this is just flat colors, so that was maybe 5 minutes a character again. So the whole idea of the miniatures allowed for a lot of time, allowed for us to save a lot of time in the whole process. And then we moved on to rigging, which is our auto rigging. Let me. You want the full screen?
If you look over on the, I guess on your right hand side over here with the boy and the bird, that was actually our first idea, the boy being chased by giant mutant birds throughout the city. But we decided to scrap that idea and something a little more AICP friendly. So just wanted to let you know that. So.
All right, nice to keep doing that. This is our rigging system. I'm not legally allowed to go into too much detail on this. We use this for all of our characters. It is developed by Eric Turman in-house. It allows for a very nonlinear workflow when rigging systems. Usually with XSI, in my experience, You really have to know exactly what you want to build in your rig and make sure you follow that linear process to get everything parented, hierarchy correct. And then if that rig needs to be changed, you have to go back in and tear it apart, add for what you want to, compensate for what you want to add, and then tack back on top of that. So the auto system allows us to lay out a rough bone system for our characters, and then lay out a temporary skeleton, adjust those adjust joint positions on that skeleton, and then load in the final skeleton controls, and then parent hierarchy, make the hierarchy however we need it, and then glue that system together. And then once we have that glued together, you basically have a recipe of how that system was built. You can save out that recipe and then rebuild the rig from scratch. It's, again, another one-click solution. You load the recipe, click load, and it will rebuild that rig. And anytime during that process, you can go back to the temporary skeleton, adjust your joint positions, refit your your permanent skeleton, and then if you want to add bones or add joints, again, go back to the temporary skeleton, add in what you need, refit your permanent skeleton, glue that system back together. And then once you have that glued together and you have added features, you can save out that recipe. So we use that process for all these characters. We had, what did I say, 10 humanoid characters. We got them all rigged, weighted in a day. So this is laying out the temporary skeleton. Once you have your joints, at this point I would spend the time making sure my joints are where they're supposed to be, and then fit the permanent skeleton on top of it. At any point, again, you can go back to the temporary skeleton, adjust those joints, and then refit your permanent skeleton. Color-coded, so animators can animate from the side without issues. And this is loading the rig from a recipe. So we finished up Jack, saved out the recipe, and then loaded up brought in every other character, loaded the recipe, and adjusted to fit. This is a quick example of rig components. I think, again, I did this one yesterday. This is really fast weighting. With better weighting, deformations would be a lot better, but it supports full foot roll, side to side, front and back, squash and stretch built in, and everything else an animator could possibly want. We also did the birds with the same system. The system allows for cars, birds, plants, anything organic, inorganic. It's a very versatile system. I was just going to go over the simulation real quick. We quickly did some simulations for the popcorn. There was a scene at the end where he was sitting around looking for another time watch, and he had all the Cracker Jack boxes and the popcorn. Instead of placing all those kernels by hand, we basically used the ICE system in Softimage. Used its rigid body system by basically just putting all those objects in the air and making them rigid bodies and then just dropping them, and where they fell, that's where we kept them. Took a little bit of tweaking, like all simulations do. You could spend days and weeks tweaking settings, but all in all, it went pretty quickly. We had to simulate, we simulated the popcorn for that shot, and there's a shot where he is dumping, at the end where he's dumping out kernels. We did kernel simulation of them coming out of the box. I think the other kernels were done in After Effects, where he's pulling out the watch when he's jumping up and down when he found the prize, and kernels were flying around. Those were done in After Effects. So we had a little bit of simulation we had to do. ICE made it really easy and quick. The simulation in XSI is basically real time, so it's very easy to tweak, resim, tweak, and resim. Got that simulation completed. I think it probably took me 3 or 4 hours, which is not too bad. I think that's all I have. Is there anything else I missed? Okay. So I'll give this over to Dennis to talk about lighting. It's all yours.
All right, thanks for coming, everybody. Have a good day. I'm kidding. Okay, what I'm going to go through real quick is kind of the lighting and rendering aspect of what we did. So basically, what I mainly do at Element X is I'm usually one of the very last people that ever touches a project before it gets sent out to clients or to the trash, wherever it goes. I don't know, half our projects, I have no idea where they go. But one of the good things about what I do is I get to tweak the hell out of everything. Like I can light, I can composite render, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the final stuff, you know, obviously through art direction and whatnot, through Chad and Brad and any of the other project managers, I have a certain degree of freedom to kind of do whatever I want to make things look good. And ultimately, the client, that's what they're paying you to do. You know, we just want it to look cool. You know, oh yeah, let me hit that big red cool button for you, and then everything just pops up into place. It never happens that way. But so that's the good part about it. But that's also the really crappy part about being at the tail end of the pipeline, because the deadline will get pushed so far back, or they won't start the project until like 2 weeks or something like that after the start date or something like that. And so I literally have like, I mean, this is an exaggeration, and I complain about this all the time, but I have like a day to light and render, you know? And I mean, we do have like this whole server, like a render farm and everything, but that can only go so fast.
That is an exaggeration. We never had that at all.
So, just really quickly, like how we did this. Let me pull this up. Okay, so one of the things that was really important with this, I know Chad kind of briefly touched this in his what was that? Sorry, I'm hearing noises. One of the things that Chad briefly talked about was when we first came up with this idea, Brad came up with this idea, and he was just like, maybe we can develop a story around miniatures, and we had no idea what we were going to do. And so when we finally developed the story and we started doing all this stuff, we needed to make, we did decide that this kid was going to start in the morning and then it's going to end up at night. And how are we going to do that? So obviously when they're there, they have the physical lights, they have the rigs and everything, and they can adjust their exposure settings on their cameras and stuff. However, in 3D, you have to match the lighting. And since this isn't an environment that we're building from scratch, and it's in fact practical footage, we have to match the lighting as closely as we can. And one of the challenges that we had was because everything was so miniature, and because of the position of where the character was going to be running around, I mean, we had a fake physical sun. It was like a big spotlight. We needed to make sure that we could get the proper light information. We threw a light probe in there. Brad took a bunch of pictures of the light probe. I don't know if any of you guys are, I don't know how many students are in here, but I don't know how familiar you are with HDR photography and how important that is when it comes to 3D lighting. It was absolutely essential with this project because we needed to nail the lighting as fast as we could without having to sit there and tweak the lighting all day and then possibly just over color correct the hell out of this thing in post. So one of the processes that we had to do was get the light probes in there, take the pictures, set up an actual HDR image, and then run it through a couple of other programs to get it set up in 3D. Once we got that, we literally had to tweak a couple of lights, and then it was off to rendering. I mean, we really did not have much time to just kind of waste with the lighting and rendering aspect of it. So what I'm going to show you right here is this is not the project you just saw. Okay, this is actually a totally different project. We're actually experimenting with this. This was actually, I pulled this off of Christopher's shared drive, so I'm stealing from his stuff. But basically, the way that you set up a nice HDR image is you want to set up, I only have 6 images right here. I think the total was like 8 or 10 that Christopher had taken. You want to shoot your camera at the light probe at different, I guess f-stops, but this one's done with different exposure times. So you want to get like the brightest image that you can get without blowing it out, and then whatever the possibly the lowest amount of light that you can get in there. And so once you do this, you get this, let me step through here. Well, let me see. The program that we use to kind of put all this together, you can actually use Photoshop to do this, but we found that we have a better utility called Hdr Shot that helps stitch all this stuff together, put it together, get all that 32-bit information and pack it into an HDR image. And what this basically does, I know it looks kind of boring, but all these tips that you saw earlier, you select those and then you would hit whatever f-stop you set your camera at, whatever exposure setting, and then you generate an image. Once you generate this image, you get something that looks like this. To the naked eye, it just looks like, oh, it just looks similar to one of the other light probes. However, in a 32-bit environment, you get this whole range of light. I mean, it's amazing how much light. I mean, you could capture as much light that's in this room in just that one image and light an entire scene with that. And so what we did next was after we created the HDR image using Hdr Shot. Yeah, you'd unwrap that. Well, you could actually use that, but we used the latitude longitudinal format to basically wrap our environment around. So this is kind of where you get into that area. You set the width and everything, set the latitude, longitude, just hit OK. Real simple. Literally, this only takes a few minutes. Once you get that going, we use something called Sybil Edit. And this helps set up. It takes that HDR image that you created, and it'll split it into a reflection, an environment, and a background. And it actually lights off of the environment. So it takes this it takes the HDR image, shrinks it down, blurs it out, gets the light to spread really nice. If there's a main source of light, such as like this big window back here, you would add a light. It tries to get some sort of color information from there, and then you just literally pump this into you set up, it'll set up a script for you. So since we're using a renderer called Arnold, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this rendering system, but it is absolutely amazing. It's kind of expensive. It was developed, I think it was developed by Sony, yeah, Sony ImageWorks, and it is absolutely amazing. I don't know, the render times are fairly quick. It is promoted as a global illumination renderer. And so I know, I used to be a student at this college, and so the render of choice here was Mental Ray using Maya. And if you've tried to do global illumination with Mental Ray, it is absolutely one of the slowest things I've ever encountered in my life. It is absolutely painful to watch. But Arnold kind of has a different algorithm. It does things a lot quicker, and that is what we use to render at our studio. And so there's all these scripts over there that just kind of like plug this into your 3D program. And once we get that, this is the image that Christopher took of, and this is actually practical footage. He has a sphere here. It's like a crystal ball or something like that against. Yeah, it's quartz, and what we ended up creating in 3D looks like that. And so this is, I mean, just real rough. I don't think you put any like extra lights or anything in this, right?
That does have one light.
Okay, one light. So it's fairly similar. I mean, it's like, if we tweaked this out, we probably could have gotten it a lot more accurate, but if you compare the two images, it's really difficult to tell which one is fake and which one is real. And that's kind of the point that we always try to make when we do these realistic projects. So that's kind of the process of what we needed to do in order to get the lighting ready for the AICP project. I'll show you a couple of breakdowns. One of the, this shot right here, behind it is practical footage, and obviously he is a 3D render. If you look at it, it's very difficult to kind of tell. You know, if you were just to look at this and you hadn't seen the film, it's real difficult to see, well, what the hell's going on? Is this real? Is this fake? We actually had a lot of comments after the fact. Some people actually thought that we modeled that train set, like in 3D. And when people can't really tell what's fake and what's real, that's actually a pretty big compliment, especially when people are just that confused. It's probably one of the biggest compliments that you can get when people can't tell that you threw in fake stuff. So the way that we started off with a background plate. So obviously it's of the general store. We did some color correction on it just to brighten it up a bit. And then this is the ambient occlusion pass for Jack. This is the beauty pass for Jack. And then we combine the two and we create him. So that's kind of, again, we were under a huge time constraint. We only had 4 weeks to do this entire process. So we had to do the quickest and fastest way of compositing possible. We had 90 shots. We were doing this in our spare time, and so we couldn't really deal with too many extra variables. So most of the shots, as amazing as this video looks, most of the shots are built just like this. There's a background plate, beauty, and then an ambient occlusion, and then maybe some other like special effects and stuff. So that's basically about 90% of what that film you saw looks like. And I'll go to, okay. This one, obviously there's not much here, but our art director was basically like, okay, what I need is Jack to be sitting there, you know, with all this stuff around him, and then he gives us this. And it's like, oh, we have to build the whole thing basically by hand. So that's actually the street. This is the ambient occlusion pass with all the popcorn. And Jack's in there sobbing. This is the beauty pass without any shadows. I comp together. We had a hard shadow for the dusk look. Color correction. A little bit depth of field. And then the sun. So we add that effect at the end. So I'll completely comp together, that's what that looks like. Okay, one of the things that we also had to do, because this was practical footage, excuse me, because this was practical footage and we did have some, we had to put the logos just kind of like all over the place. And so it wasn't going to be interesting if we just plastered the logo on top of something and nothing moved, you know. So we did a lot of tracking. A good chunk of the tracking was done using Mocha, which comes with After Effects. A very powerful tracking tool. It has like roto and all this stuff. I personally probably only know about 2% of that program, but it is a pretty amazing piece of software. We also used SynthEyes to help track the more complex shots because After Effects and Mocha can only do so much. But this is an example of what we did. So this is actual practical footage. This is a label, a little sign that was on the side of the building. And we're going to replace that and a couple others with our stuff. So this is just kind of a breakdown. So that's the practical. Add the tracking markers, paint those out, put ours in, and then that's the result. So I think we had maybe 2 or 3 people tracking these things. Once we got these tracked, we just put placeholders, put them aside. We had more compositors than we did trackers, and so what they would do later was go back in, add the logos, make sure that they blended in okay, and then we just render the shot. Really no time to just kind of mess around there. And I think that's about it for me. I don't really know what else.
One thing about that HDR lighting, Mike's in the audience here. He did a lot of our compositing. And when I first started doing 3D, I was always adamant of trying to get the render to look exactly like it needs to be for the final output. But even with HDR lighting as accurate as it is, really we only need to get 80–90% there. And then once it goes into compositing, there's always going to be color correction. That it will take it to that final 100% looks completely integrated, accurate result.
Yeah, so I mean, we do have a lot of very talented compositors in-house, and so the color correction aspect of it was extremely important. That is always one of those things that you cannot be cheap on when it comes to the final color correction, because that's literally the last thing you do before you send these things out. And so, so yeah, that's really, really important. So the HDR lighting will get you so far. A lot of times it'll nail it. Unfortunately, with these models, because they were so small and because the environments were there's so many variables, sometimes it didn't do as good of a job as we needed it to. So in that sense, what Christopher and I had to do, we did have to tweak the lights. We did have to get like the color temperatures of the sky and all that stuff set up correctly, and then make sure that everything blended in during compositing. So.
And normally you'd want to take two angles. You want to shoot the chrome ball from two different angles, and Hdr Shot can take those two angles and eliminate the photographer in the reflection. So you eliminate yourself out of the equation of the lighting. But a lot of those sets were so small, and we actually had a very small HDR probe, that we couldn't get several angles. We could only get one shot. And ideally, there's millions of different ways to do. Well, there's not millions. There's a couple different ways to do HDR, but we were able to get the lighting we needed from one angle, one shot, and it worked out very well for us. But so we were kind of limited in that aspect. We had to work around that hurdle, but got it done.
Anything else from you guys?
No, I think that's it.
So in a nutshell, you kind of saw the whole process and kind of how we put it together. You know, like I said, it was a really rewarding experience for us on a lot of levels. You know, creativity-wise, and you know, just from a technical standpoint, just being able to kind of put the way we do things, you know, under the fire, on the fire, and see, you know, how we hold up. And like I said, it was amazing. It was just really amazing just watching in those 4 weeks, just everybody fire on all cylinders and kind of come together. And like I said, we were really, really happy with the end result. And we were, you know, even more ecstatic when we found out that once it got out there, it was so well received. So yeah, it was a very interesting project. And like I said, I hope everybody kind of had a good time learning about how we put it together and watching the final piece. So thank you to Vince and Short Guys and everybody for having us, and we appreciate being here.
Q&A.
So.
Questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions?
I'll just point.
Yeah.
Did you get any part of the stopping time idea from Twilight Zone? My wife.
I think we discussed
Somebody
that.
mentioned that.
Yeah, somebody had mentioned that. Somebody had mentioned there was one episode of a Twilight Zone that had something similar to that. I think we talked about that at one point during the process, but I don't remember specifically.
The meetings that we had, the first meeting was semi-productive. When we just kind of got together, threw out ideas, it was all trash. Unfortunately, we wasted about 2 hours just talking about what we wanted to do and what we thought could happen, but a lot of it was overly ambitious. You know, we're building, what was it, that mechanical hummingbird with like 1,000 parts in it, and it would have taken Eric like 2 years to rig, and he would have blown his brains out at the end of the project. Yeah, it was one of those things where that particular meeting did not go that as well as we thought. The second one was when this actually come up, and so when we started talking about what we could do about it was, I don't remember where the time freezing thing came from.
Well, that's when we saw the miniature, like when we just kind of realized.
Yeah, because they're all doing this, and the cars look like they're halfway driving and stuff, and so we thought, well, that solves like all the animation right there. They're not even moving, you know. And then, so it was. I guess it was kind of one of those things. It was a no-brainer at that point. We have to do frozen time. So unless we wanted to animate 1 million people and everything else, so
yeah.
So the Twilight Zone, somebody did mention that, but I don't think that was the prime motivation.
I think that came up after we had the idea too.
But you know, I mean, it goes just one of those things. I mean, I'm sure everything that's being done is being done. You know, people are just kind of taking ideas and kind of combining them and everything. So, but yeah, somebody did mention the Twilight idea, the Twilight Zone idea. So yeah. So anybody else have questions? You guys?
I can answer that. Actually, there's a couple of ways. One was we just eyeballed it, just brute force eyeballed some of these shots, and then another was that tracking software called Synthesize that we use. It will, if you plug in enough information about the camera, like the focal length and all that stuff, the film back and everything. Once the footage starts moving around, it realizes, oh, this is kind of where, it'll throw in nulls everywhere, and then it figures out like exactly where these nulls are, and it'll kind of create this weird null cloud-based 3D environment, real ugly, but, and then after some tweaking, it'll actually fix that, and it'll give you a camera angle. And so once we can bring that into XSI and use the existing footage as a roto, and we can animate the characters or do whatever we need while it's tracking to the footage. And so it gives you all that information.
I think because most of your character animation was centered, you didn't have to worry about any lens distortion or anything.
Yeah, that was another thing also. Again, because of time constraints and everything, the character was always almost animated at the origin. Any surfaces that we had, like when he was running up on top of cars, top of the car was the origin. The street obviously was the origin, you know, I mean, things like that. So whatever he was primarily going to be standing on, that's where the animators would start. And yeah, we didn't really have to worry too much about the whole lens distortion thing. So, yeah. I'm sorry.
All the tracking that the software did had to be animated, or otherwise, for a still, you have to stay eyeball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if there was something that was definitely moving, like Brad had a lot of these shots where it was just kind of like going down the street, and he had it on this track. Those needed to be tracked, and we needed to get the camera exactly where it needed to be. Otherwise, the character would shift, or there would be some sort of weird bump. He'd look like he was floating, you know, just weird things like that.
And wasn't Eric able to get a track off a still image too?
Yeah.
He was able to get camera information from a still image as well. So a lot of those still images, we had cameras too.
Yeah.
There's actually a funny story you mentioned about the fact that some of the vehicles that we animated, I don't know what the percentage was. There was a good chunk of them that were CG, and then there was another chunk of them that were actually cars that were on the set that we actually tied like a little transparent fishing wire to, and we pulled them. So there's actually a couple of funny shots if you go through there and watch where they're pulling them too fast, and it looked like there's a drunk driver in the car just kind of bouncing up and down.
The front end's like bouncing like this.
Yeah. So there's a lot of little funny moments like that. It kind of turned out. So.
When we first got the footage of, like when Brad first shot this and he brought back some of the footage and we were watching this, most of it's just like camera pans and still shots and whatever. And then like all of a sudden, some of these like inanimate cars are just driving around. And we're like, holy crap, how did that happen? How did you do that? And yeah, they tied like fishing line and just kind of dragged it across. So. It was a nice little mix. I mean, some of the cars were done in 3D, like the ones that obviously made right-hand turns. It's impossible to do with the screen, but.
There's actually another shot at the very beginning where the guy is fishing and he kind of throws he casts his line into the water and you see the little bobble thing kind of bobble up and down. Brad, the guy who shot this, Brad, he's also kind of our resident After Effects guru, and like he will, because he doesn't know 3D, he will literally like do everything in his power to avoid using 3D by throwing as much in After Effects as he can. And like to the point where I joke a long time ago, he did a project where we needed to do a 3D camera move of a house where the camera started off in the house and then it pulls up and goes straight up into the sky. So you're going to see a lot of perspective. Well, this is on a different project, obviously, but he basically built the house in 3D in After Effects with cards, like refusing to go ask the 3D guy just to build him a house and render it. And like ended up like literally the After Effects render time was like an hour a frame for After Effects, you know, which normally takes like a minute, you know, at tops. And so, you know, we gave Brad the, you know, the running title, like the 16-hour frame After Effects rendering guy. And that shot with the fishing wire, he did all that in After Effects. He shot footage of water in his house in a pan. He composited the water in the pan in there to get the little thing bobbing up and down. The fishing wire was all in After Effects as it was casting. It was pretty insane. And that's just Brad.
That was probably, honestly, that was probably the most complicated shot in the whole, and it was only like 2 seconds long.
Yeah.
He lost some hair doing that. Which one was it? Final video?
Yeah.
It'll pop up. It's like the 4th shot in.
There it is, right there.
That's all.
That's all After Effects. There's no 3D in that at all whatsoever. And he literally just comped the hell out of that thing. And
weren't there were canoe guys too? Weren't there people on canoes or something?
yeah, that might have been.
I think that one's later. I think.
I know that was Brad too with his
I don't
pan of
think
water.
that one was quite as complicated, but
Yeah, that's
the water in that one was practical too.
Yeah.
And like, mind you, we can do all this stuff in 3D, but he's one of those guys that, you know, I think he spent all weekend on that one shot too.
The fishing pole thing, he just one Saturday decided I'm just going to do this shot and filmed water and animated the guy casting the wire. And
yeah, you'll see if you look really closely, some of these things you'll see the string like on the cars and stuff.
That's all After Effects, the tumbling.
Tumbleweed.
There's a truck that drives by here.
The smoke was in After Effects.
It's funny watching these trucks go by because there's no driver in them.
Yeah.
Like this one. Hold on. This one, oh, no driver. Look at that. It's empty cab. No driver.
Actually, this scene right here with the guy waving, there's actually a little bit of a backstory on this one. If those of you who are old like me and played like VGA, King's Quest and Space Quest games back in the day, there was a shot in, I believe it's either Space Quest 3 or 4. Me and Brad are big Sierra guys. We're hardcore old school gamers. There's a shot in Space Quest 3 or 4 where this little family of aliens is taking a vacation in a station wagon, and then there's like a little intergalactic alien shop vendor guy, and he basically comes out and the family hops in the station, takes the picture, hops in the station wagon and takes off, and he's waving and he's like, hey, come back, y'all. So we basically put this shot in there as a homage to Space Quest, where the guy's waving and the station wagon drives off. So.
Yeah, so most of the vehicles that are moving were actually pulled by string. We only had a couple. We did have to get a couple of assets for vehicles for like real specific shots, like where the car's turning. And at the very last minute, Brad was like, we were talking about something, the whole Back to the Future thing, and he was at the very last minute, he goes, hey, do you think we could somehow get a DeLorean asset? I was like, yeah, probably. And we ended up throwing that in here. I don't know if you can tell. Most people don't. Most people, that just glazes right by them. But
You go to the kid with the balloon. with
Oh, yeah.
flux capacitors.
Yeah.
And
So
you
there
know-
were a lot of like Back to the Future references.
Before that. Yeah,
so there's-
brown flux capacitors up there in the corner and stuff.
Yeah. So I guess any other questions? I thought I saw someone over here. Okay. Getting what information?
Are you just using, when you're doing HDR, are you just capturing light information from the scene to lighting? Or are you actually
Yes.
using?
Yes, actually, the way that, like, let's say we didn't bring any. I guess that was a good idea. We should have brought one of those light probes.
Yeah.
Basically, what that does is that because it's a 360-degree object and whatever, it'll reflect and catch basically all the lights in this room. You take an HDR, you take a DSLR camera, or just any kind of camera, and you take pictures using different f-stops, and you get a whole range of lighting information, and the 3D software will actually read the HDR information off of that, and you can emit light from that image. And so traditionally you would have like a dome set up, throw the HDR on there and have it emit light, and it would mimic the soft lighting like in this room. So if we were to kind of run through a demo and put like a 3D object here with the HDR lighting, it would look extremely realistic. It helps so much with just trying to get that little bit of realism. Just trying to get past that little boundary of fake and realism. HDR lighting helps push that.
One thing that blew me away is with the sphere. If you have your dome in front of you and you're shooting this, you put your hand behind that dome. After you unwrap that in HDR Shot, you see your hand, which is hidden from the camera, because that sphere will actually pick up 360 degrees of information from one angle. So when you unwrap that, the HDR, beyond the lighting, you're going to use that information for reflections. So when he's walking by a red door or something, he's going to have that reflection on his body of that red door. So that integrates him even more.
Any other questions?
All right.
Nope.
Thank you.